welcome back to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is October 1st. We are officially in October, and we got a ton to get to today. We're going to start with all the surprise undefeated teams, BYU, Indiana, Pitt. I want to get to all of them and give you an idea of who I think could possibly make a little bit of a college football playoff run. There's not a ton in here that possibly could, but at the end of the day, there's definitely some very interesting teams to break down. Then we'll get to some winners and losers from Week 5. The biggest winners were by far just the college football fans, but I'll break down exactly what I mean from that. Then we'll get to a little bit of update from the Pac-12 and Mountain West. There's been a lot of different movement out there, some teams that they need to add in the next little bit, and definitely some talks ongoing. So I'll break down all of the updates there. We'll get to some questions coming out of Week 5, all of the different things, who got the biggest win. I think we all know the answer there. Also, did Colorado turn a corner this past weekend? A huge win for Dion in Colorado. Definitely could be a sign of the times coming. And then I'll get you updated on my top 12 teams in the country. This was a tough list to put together with all the movement that happened this past weekend. So, going to be an incredible show. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show. And the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, you can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat feature at the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page. Just click that $sign, add any question, comment you'd like, and it'll pop up on the screen and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely something I would like you guys to utilize as we go throughout the season. Want this to be as much y'all show as it is mine. So definitely utilize that if you would like to. Also, gsmcpodcast.net is still up and running, does the exact same thing. So either one of those, more than fine with me. But let's jump in because we have a couple of undefeated teams that we did not expect to be undefeated by any means. So I want to get to them, want to give them some flowers while I can, and get to what can they possibly do in the playoff? What are they capable of in this CFP era where a lot of teams can get in, and there can be these quote-unquote Cinderella teams that find their way into the playoff field, and there's a number that have kind of set their stake at least in the possible playoff going forward. And the first one I want to talk about is BYU. I really like this Cougars team. Now, there are definitely some holes there, and I worry about their offense's ability to score on the elite teams in the country. But at the end of the day, this is a team that I think kind of fits what I would tend to believe is the Cinderella mold of the 12-team playoff. You have veteran playmakers like Chase Roberts and Kamari Lassiter. You have so many different guys on the outside. You have Keelan Marion, another one, dynamic quarterback in Jake Retzlaff that can beat you with his arm or his leg. Veteran O-line, veteran defense, a lot of just continuity within that program. And I think that's something that, frankly, especially in the Big 12 right about now, you just don't make mistakes, you're probably in pretty good shape because there's a lot of teams over there that are making mistakes. BYU's done a great job of that. And the schedule is going to be tough. That's the part I worry about more than anything else. Coming out of the bye they have this week, they have Arizona and then Oklahoma State, and then they head to Orlando. So it's not necessarily going to get a ton easier. Then they get Utah after another bye. So they got to go 2-2 in those games at the very least. 3-1 would obviously put them in a really good position in the Big 12. And we saw some issues last week, no doubt about it, letting Baylor back in that game. This is still a very good team. I think that Arizona and that Oklahoma State game are going to tell me pretty much all I need to know about this team. Obviously, there will still be some interesting things to happen coming forward, but those are two games that I'll be watching very closely. And if they can come out with 2 wins, then things get a little bit more interesting around the BYU Cougars. Then you got Duke, which is maybe the weirdest one of the bunch. I'll be totally honest with you, and frankly, I'm going to keep this one a little bit brief. The answer is probably no. And this is a fun team. They're doing a great job just getting out wins, but they beat Elon 26-3 to start the year. They knocked off Northwestern in overtime, who is not necessarily world beaters by any means. They beat UConn by 5, and then took care of Middle Tennessee, to be totally fair, and then had this past week where beat UNC by 1 point. This is a team that's finding a way to win, and it's not to disrespect the finding a way to win because that's obviously very, very impressive. But you got Georgia Tech this upcoming weekend, then SMU, Miami, and Virginia Tech down the road. I'm having a hard time seeing Duke being able to keep up with all of those teams. All of that being said, I think there's a world where they go 8-4 this year. If they go 8-4 in the very first year of Manny Diaz, they're off rolling, especially when your rival North Carolina is not necessarily doing what they wanted to do this year as well as North Carolina State. So starting this with an 8-4 season would be absolutely huge for Duke, and starting 5-0 is probably what they needed to do to get there. So absolutely huge for them, regardless of if they end on a little bit of a skid. I think they're still very capable of making it 8 wins, maybe even 9 wins, if they can get one of those wins over Georgia Tech or Virginia Tech towards the end of the year. But overall, probably not a team that's going to make noise in the CFP race, but very, very interesting that they just keep finding a way to win. So maybe we'll be here in a week time and be talking about the same exact team. But moving on to Pitt, this is one of the more interesting teams in the country. I think when we talk about a lot of the things in the ACC, it's all about Clemson, it's all about Miami, and they're just up there in Pittsburgh just kind of hanging out. They're doing exactly what you'd ask them to do. Eli Holstein has been one of the best quarterbacks in the entire ACC, probably only behind Cam Ward, in my opinion. Cade Klubnik would be right up there as well, but the reality is this kid is playing really, really good football. Over 1,100 yards, 12 touchdowns, 2 picks, 189 on the ground, and 2 scores. He's doing everything that you want him to do, and he's doing it at a pretty young age. So this is something that you'll like to see for quite some time up there in Pittsburgh. And they do get UNC this weekend, then Cal at home before playing Syracuse. They could possibly win all 3 of those games, and then it gets really real. You have at SMU, you do get Virginia at home as a little bit of a buffer. Then you get Clemson at home, at Louisville, and then at Boston College. It's going to be really hard. There's no two ways about that. But let's say they get through the next 3 games undefeated, and they're, I believe, 7-0 walking out of those games. Things could get really interesting. And then you go to SMU. Maybe that's a game that's a little bit of a toss-up as of right now, and things could get really interesting in a hurry. I think this is a team that has some juice. There's no two ways about that. They are not a team that's going to quit. We learned that against West Virginia, and there's definitely some issues on defense, but definitely a dangerous team. I don't know if they're going to make a big-time run, but there's a couple of games in the back half of that schedule that if they can just win the toss-up, so they'll be right in that conversation. Moving on to the Big Ten, we got Indiana Hoosiers doing incredible things out there in Bloomington. I think this is one of my favorite teams in the country developing right now. Curtis Rourke is slinging the rock. Elijah Surratt is an absolute dude on the outside. Kurt Cignetti coming in has just made this team really, really fun to watch. Coming over from JMU, this was not going to be an easy thing to pull off, and he's done an incredible job. He's just absolutely been one of the coaches of the year thus far, along with Mario Cristobal and another number of other guys. But it's been incredible to see what he's been able to do, and it's going to be really difficult. But the reality is, there's a world where Indiana's 9-0 going into that Michigan game towards the end of the season. They have some tough games, but at the end of the day, they have some games that they absolutely can win on this schedule. And the way that they're playing right now, especially offensively, I think they have a shot to do it. Now, they obviously got some tough ones. Northwestern this weekend makes it a little bit easier. Then Nebraska comes to them. If they can win that one, you have Washington and then Michigan State to follow it. That could put you at 9-0. Obviously, you're walking a little bit of a tightrope, some tough games in that stretch, but then you walk into that Michigan-Ohio State stretch at the end of the season. You split those, or even if you lose both of those, you're still very much in this conversation. So this is a team that, frankly, it might just be the schedule that sets up really nicely for them, and they're sitting at the end of the year being 10-2, and you're looking at an Indiana team and trying to figure out where you slide them into the playoff, and if you slide them into the playoff, which could be an interesting conversation. And then you get to Rutgers, a very, very fun team over there in Piscataway, New Jersey. They are doing really, really good stuff. And I think they're a really good football team. I think they're executing at a really high level. They're doing the things that a Greg Schiano team is really good at doing. They're running the ball, they're playing defense, and they're not making a ton of mistakes. And also, they avoid Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon, and Indiana. Just kind of wanted to throw Indiana along with those top 3. That's a huge path to the playoff. There's no two ways about that. They have every chance to avoid all the big-time teams. They do have to play USC, but let's just say this is a team that is able to run the ball the same way Michigan was. Probably not to that level, but with Kyle Montague, with Sam Brown the fifth, you absolutely have a really good duo. And if you can just lean on that team, then maybe things get a little bit more interesting. This is another team that maybe just sets up really nicely for them. They have a huge game this weekend against Nebraska. Then they go to USC, play Illinois at home. So there's going to be tough games, no doubt about it. But we could look up in November and see an 8-1 or 7-2 Rutgers with a couple of huge games coming up, and that would be really fun to watch, no doubt about that. Then we got a JMU team that maybe isn't quite as big of a surprise, but I think with all the turnover that was going on over there, I think it's fair to assume they weren't going to beat UNC going into the season, and they did just that, and they kind of took them to the woodshed. So I think this is a really, really good team. I think you have Alonzo Barnett that's getting more and more comfortable in that system. Bob Chesney has done an incredible job just overhauling that roster in general. You have Omarion Dollison and Cam Ross on the outside, as well as a number of other guys. And the schedule is very doable. There's not a game that they will not be favored in. They do go to App State, which is going to be tough. Georgia State at Old Dominion are going to be interesting games, as well as Marshall. But the reality is this is the best team in this Sun Belt, and they avoid a lot of the other teams in the other division with Texas State and South Alabama. Avoiding those two teams puts you in a really good place, and then you just got to play really good football on that last Saturday to possibly get in the field. So this is a team that I very much see as a real possibility for that group of 5 spot, and I can't wait to see them go to work. I mean, they're so much fun to watch. They're elite offense, obviously, and I think they're one of those teams that we could look up at the end of the year and they're just playing elite football, have blown everyone out, and they're walking into that game with as much confidence as you possibly could as a 12 seed. And then we got UNLV, and this is a team that maybe is a little bit less surprising as well, but the reality is beating Houston, beating Kansas is not something that I had on my bingo card for UNLV, and this is a team that absolutely is going to be in that G5 conversation. They are playing such great football, and the team is better now. The offense is scarier with Hajj Malik Williams at quarterback position. There are so many different things that they can do out of that offense, and frankly, Brennan Marion's got to be really happy that he has a quarterback that can sling the rock, that can do the things that he wants to do in that offense, as well as Ricky White being able to be the player that he's capable of being. So this is a really dangerous team. This is a team that absolutely can compete with just about anyone, or definitely anyone in the Mountain West, and they've proven that they can compete with a number of Power 4 teams. They have Syracuse this upcoming weekend, which is going to be very, very interesting, and definitely a game that we will break down probably tomorrow. And then they got a big one against Boise State. So we'll figure out what this team is about. Ashton Jeanty coming to town is not going to be easy to deal with, but this is absolutely a team that can do it. There's no doubt in my mind. Frankly, I think they're one of those teams that once they get into that field, whether they're the 12 seed, 11 seed, 10 seed, they can make some things happen really, really quickly. They're a dangerous offense and definitely a team that I would be watching very closely going forward. And then you got the 2 service academies. We've got to give them a little bit of a shout out here because they are absolutely rolling. And they're rolling behind 2 really elite quarterbacks. Bryson Daly has done an incredible job over there at Army, is the leading rusher right now, is running that triple option offense just to perfection as of right now. He's one of those guys that you definitely don't want to face him. I can promise you that. He can cause problems for literally any defense in the entire country. And then you got Blake Horvath on the other side, who's been absolutely remarkable. 637 through the air, 7 touchdowns, 1 pick, 450 on the ground, 8 touchdowns. He's done everything. He's been their entire offense along with Bryson Daly. And this is going to be one of those things that there's a world where these 2 teams play for a conference title and then play each other in a regular season game the week after. It is going to be really weird to watch these teams go through the rest of the season. Now, Navy got the short end of the stick when it comes to scheduling. They have Tulane, they have USF while Army avoids them. East Carolina is going to be a huge one for Army, and then they both get Notre Dame. So that's going to be really tough for them, no doubt about that. But I can almost promise you, these are the 2 teams that no one wants to see in the playoff. No one wants to have to get prepared for a triple option offense at the very end of the year and then flip right back to your normal defense the next week. So this is one of those games that I think if they keep rolling and they keep playing good football and maybe they elevate even a little bit more, there will be some teams that are just a little bit nervous when that Army or Navy team gets to 10-0, 11-0, and things get a little bit more interesting for that. So it's going to be interesting to watch these teams. I'm still a little bit skeptical that they can get it all going and win those big-time games down the stretch of this season, but I don't know. They're one of those teams that if they find a way into the field, there's not a defense in the country that would want that assignment. I can absolutely promise you that. But definitely going to be really fun to watch these teams the rest of the way. Some interesting teams. I don't know if all of those can make that run that I'm hoping that they possibly can, but there are some group of 5 teams in there that absolutely can. And then I think Indiana is a really interesting team just because of that schedule. They have every ability to win a lot of those games and make a little bit of a run. So it will be awesome to watch those teams, but let's take our first break here. And when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of breakdown of the winners and the losers from this past weekend. I think one of the biggest winners is just the future of college football at the wide receiver position. And I think you know exactly what I mean, but we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.